I'm not the poet laureate.
Welcome to Betty on the Go. I'm your host, Betty Gudel. We are live here at the Accelerator Building, 720 Willette. If you're driving by, even though it's raining, give us a little wave. We're continuing our interview with Mary Ann Mulhern, and this week we're going to be looking at her 3 other books. One in particular, and that one was written for the survivors of the Father Charles Sylvestre abuse case, and for all those who have survived sexual abuse. When Angels Weep. What an appropriate title. Very, very heavy. We'll be right back.
Betty's on the go.
You're watching XTV broadcasting live from downtown Windsor, from the Windsor Downtown Business Accelerator, and this is Betty on the Go with Betty Gudel. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. We're talking with Mary Ann Mulhern. She's a poet, an author, and a teacher. She hails from St. Thomas, Ontario. She had a very interesting past. She grew up as a grave digger's daughter. Later went on to join the convent for 8 years. We're going to talk a little bit about that and her new books. So instead, we're going to get right into this one because that one is very compelling. And this one is When Angels Weep. And Mary Ann compiled these poems for the women who were children who were abused by Father Charles Sylvestre. He was acquitted in 2006.
He was arrested and convicted.
In 2006?
Yes.
Okay. And you spent a lot of time with the survivors.
Yes.
And you spoke with them and you wrote all these poems. I think that really helps some of these survivors because they can put all of that into emotion. It kind of pushes it away.
I hope so.
Because it's hard to even talk about.
I hope so. They found it very difficult to talk about at first, but then when they did, I was able to learn so much from them, and to try to even begin to understand what they had gone through. But I don't think anyone else can really understand the depth, the gravity, the seriousness, and really the tragedy.
Some of the poems were very heavy. It's almost like you could be there. There was one that was on page 17, Can't Be Right, but It Must Be. I think that's a great poem to read because
Yes.
for a little person, I mean, that's who you're trusting, and you think, this can't be right, but it's got to be. He's the Father, everyone rejoices in him.
That's correct, and the woman who related that to me was 9 years old when this happened, and she had been chosen to go to the rectory to fold bulletins, and she thought, oh, isn't this wonderful?
Of course.
And yes, and I said, well, what was it like? And she said, well, it was a party. She said, at our house we didn't have pop, and we didn't have chocolate bars, and we had cases of pop and chocolate bars, and the music was playing, and she said it was a party.
It was almost like hunting.
Yes.
A lure to get it's a trap.
That's true. It was a trap. And I said to her, then what happened? And she said, well, he would say, let's say it was Mary Ann. Let's say it was Mary Ann. He would say, well, Mary Ann, you come into my office for just a minute because I think you're special. Of the other girls, you're special.
And that would make you feel special.
Oh, and it did. It made her feel wonderful. And then I said, can you tell me anything about that room? And she said, yes. He had a large leather chair, black leather chair. But she said the window was covered with red velvet drapes. Now, right away, red velvet drapes, what does that indicate? It indicates something dark. It indicates something maybe related to blood. and tragedy.
A boudoir, even?
Yes, yes. And so he would say, come and sit in Father Charlie's lap because you're really special. And so she said, I'd go and sit in his, I sat in his lap, and then he would say, can you give Father Charlie a kiss? And he'd point to his cheek. She thought that was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give Father Charlie a kiss on the lips? She thought that was a little funny, but she did. And then he wanted a kiss on the tongue, and she drew away at that point. She drew away because she thought that was so strange.
Mm-hmm.
And then she said, I tried to get off his lap, but he hung on to me, and his hands were under my clothes. And she said, inside my panties. And she said, I knew, like, how could that be right? And she said, I was so confused, it can't be right, but it must be right because it's Father.
That's right, and she was just frozen.
Right.
And then for a
Right.
lot of these girls, there was another poem, and that was a test for confirmation.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I'm to blame, right?
Yes, and a
That's
lot
what
of
I
the girls did blame themselves, and they thought that it really was their fault, and so they really did suffer from that. I'm just looking.
Oh, I have that. I think that's page 50.
Okay, thanks. Thanks.
And there were a few of them that really hit me. There was another one, and I think that was Bless Me Father. Was that the one about they come to the door?
I think like she was in confession.
Mhm.
She was in confession, and even in the confessional, like he was still grooming these girls, and he was still threatening them. For example, he would say, you know, if you tell anyone about what's happening, Jesus will come down from the crucifix and he will kill you. Or if you tell anyone you're going to go to hell, your mother is, your father is, and that lovely new baby brother of yours is going to go to hell. Now these kids, you're listening to this from a priest, and they were just absolutely terrified, and they really believed that, thank you, that was going to happen. And so they didn't tell. Now
It's really the fear of God.
it was, yeah,
Mhm.
and so a few of them. One little girl actually, she was sitting in class in grade 4, and she started to cry. And the nun who was teaching took her out into the hall and said, like, what's wrong? And she said, you send me to the rectory after school, and this is what Father Sylvestre is doing to me. And the little kid, in her own little language, told the nun what he was. And the nun said, you filthy, terrible, lying, horrible child. And she put her into a closet, into a broom closet, and she left her in there for all that day and another day. And I talked to that woman. I spoke with her, and she said, you know, to this day, I can't stay alone in the house at night. My husband has to be there. And if he has to work, he'll call and say, okay, go to your mother's house. Because she said the whole house becomes a closet for me. And this is, she's 60 years old now.
And another way, because when I was reading Brides in Black, because they live in such a small little world of their own.
Yes.
So I'm sure that the nun probably didn't want to hear anything of sex talk. She just thought that was so terrible anyways,
Yes.
that she just wanted to push it under the carpet. She couldn't deal with it because you're not taught to deal with that kind of stuff, or even to talk about it, or to think about it.
That's right.
And so,
That's right. And also because this was a priest.
Yes.
And the nuns just adored the priests. And they really thought that they were sacred. And how could this child? And so there were those two factors. You're right. There were those two factors. And also, nuns don't really have any experience with children beyond teaching them in a classroom. They're not mothers. And so there are many complexities of children that nuns don't understand as much as they try.
and part of your other book, it's the Brides in Black, and also the red dress. It kind of gives me a better understanding of why nuns were that way, because I know I grew up in Catholic schools, and some of the nuns were quite mean. They were very distant to people, but as you explained, you weren't allowed to be close to children.
That's right. You
So-
weren't allowed that. And so that created a barrier right there. And a number of the nuns were very compassionate. And I went through all Catholic schools too. I was fortunate. I really had good teachers, and the nuns that I encountered in school were kind. But I know that there were, as in any teaching population, there were some individuals that weren't nuns who were not very nice either. So I wouldn't want to characterize the nuns as mean, because I didn't find that. But we did have a distance from children, and that was unfortunate. I think if we had been allowed more closeness with children, we'd have been more understanding of them, and maybe more compassionate.
And for these children who were abused, they couldn't go to their parents because they would be, their parents would think that was ridiculous.
Their parents frequently didn't believe them. There were
Mhm.
very few. There was one child, and I spoke to her as an adult, beautiful young woman, and she said her parents did believe her, but they didn't know what to do. They didn't know whether to go to the police or whether to go to the bishop or what. And so they consulted another priest who was a friend of theirs, and he said, "Oh, look at your little girl. She's just beautiful. There's nothing wrong. So don't go to the bishop and don't go to the police." And that was not good advice.
That's right, because on page 38 you have another book. It's called About a Holy Priest. And the police come and knock at the little girl's door,
Yes.
and another priest accompanies them. I think, no, it doesn't look like there's anything wrong with her. Like, she's lying, basically, and the parents are embarrassed.
Yes, yes. And then there was another instance where a little girl told her older sister, her sister was about 18, and the sister went to the police. And the police came to the door, and the mother was just so embarrassed. And she said, "You've disgraced me before the parish, you've disgraced me before my neighbors, and you're a lying little girl." And this kid, she said, "I knew then, like I was totally ostracized from my family, from my school, from my community."
It's like being in a prison within yourself.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it, Betty. That's a very good way of putting it. And that's exactly how she felt. And so consequently, a lot of these kids did not finish high school. They just didn't. And they left school when they were less than 16. Some of them went maybe to a nearby town, got a job waitressing or something. But they mourned the fact that they never completed their education and that they never went on to college or university, which many of them certainly would have done. And so what does that do? Well, that infringes on your financial existence powerfully.
Yes.
And also, like, who do you choose as a partner? Well, certainly not the range of people that you would have chosen.
You have no self-confidence, and you
no.
you don't feel as self-reliant.
No, not at
Sure.
all. And you're right about the self-confidence. That is lacking in many of them forever. And the one question that they all asked is, what would my life have been if this had not happened to me? And all of them see that the whole trajectory of their life was changed forever by what happened with Father Sylvestre. And when I was talking to them, all I could do was think, I'm so lucky that he never came to St. Thomas, because he very easily could have. And I'm so lucky that that tragedy didn't happen to me, but it's happened to them, and they have to deal with it. And I found the women absolutely wonderful. I'm still in contact with several of them, and they have done so well, but I can see where they would have done so much better if this had not happened.
It was therapy for them because they have someone who understands, and you can put all their feelings into words.
Yes, and I think
Be the
that
voice.
was beneficial. Actually, the night of the launch of When Angels Weep, here at the university at the Catman's Lounge, there were 400 people. There were so many people that the fire department came in and said, if you let one more person in, we're going to close it down. So now the Crown Attorney was Paul Bailey, and Paul Bailey worked so earnestly with these women, and he believed so much in this, and he successfully prosecuted that case so that Sylvestre was convicted and was imprisoned. But by then he was a very old man, and he didn't live very long.
And as we were saying when we were walking here, that he expected forgiveness in the end, but he condemned all of his, how do I call them, all of the people that he abused.
Yes, yes, he
all
did.
of his victims. I wanted to say victims. I don't know if that was a good word.
Well, actually, they didn't use. They always use the term survivors.
Survivors.
They always use the term survivors. Yes, and like we might tend to think of them that way, and I did in the beginning, but
Right.
they kept referring to themselves, and I
survivors.
was so happy that that's the way they see themselves.
Because they can move on.
Yeah, they can move on. It's much more positive. Yes, because the prosecutor, at the last day when he was convicted, Sylvestre was convicted. he came across the courtroom to the prosecutor and said, "Here is a book on forgiveness. The women must forgive me." Notice, they must forgive me. And he's putting it as almost like a command.
Because he's so used to being that control.
Yes. And so when Paul Bailey went to see him in prison, he said, "I wanted to know what made this guy tick." And he said, sure enough, like all pedophiles, he blamed the little girls. He said they wore short skirts to school, they sat on chairs in a provocative way, and when they received communion, they put their tongues out. Well, at the time, that's what everybody did.
Absolutely.
To receive communion. And so Paul Bailey said, yes, sure enough, he blamed the little kids. And that is so pathetic.
It's very pathetic, especially when he blamed them and he never forgave them for when they didn't do anything. And another thing I wanted to say is, it makes a lot of wonderful priests look bad, because there's some great priests out there.
Yes,
and I think someone like Charles Sylvestre, even if he wasn't in the priesthood, he would have found his way, because he was a sociopath.
Yeah, he was a pedophile, and even had he not been a priest, he most likely would have. But because he was a priest, and because he stood for so many things that people respect and consider sacred, it made it far worse. It made it far worse.
Did we get an apology from the Catholic Church?
I think that Bishop Fabro did make an effort. He did make an effort, and you have to give him credit for that. And so the women did receive some financial remuneration, but it really wasn't enough for most of them to really make any difference in their lives, any significant difference in their lives. But there was some effort. And so I think in the States, United States, the settlements are considerably larger to help a person.
And there was 47
there were
survivors.
47.
47 that came forward that we know about.
That we know about.
So, and it's unbelievable, because he didn't feel guilty, because he would have stopped at some point. And he didn't want to be forgiven until he was caught, really, and condemned.
He wasn't contrite at all about it or sorry about it, and that's very sad. That's very sad. It's very sad for the victims, because then they have this feeling, and a lot of these feelings don't go away. In fact, some of them, a trigger for them is a Roman collar. And if they see a Roman collar, it triggers these memories again. And one of them said to me, "I cannot even stand on the sidewalk outside of a Catholic church. I start feeling ill. I immediately start feeling ill." And she said, "I can't go to weddings, funerals, or anything in a Catholic church." So there are all of these repercussions. And one of them said that after Sylvestre was convicted and had gone to prison, she gave a talk actually at St. Peter's Seminary. And the priest who was directing the young seminarians heard her say that she had great difficulty with even seeing a Roman collar, and he immediately reached and removed his Roman collar. And she said she felt it was really that this priest had heard her, and she was very grateful for that. So here was a man, a priest, who was sensitive to what she had gone through.
And just those little things can make someone feel so enlightened.
Yes. And so that was beneficial. We just don't ever want it to happen again.
We're going to be right back with Mary Ann Mulhern, and we're going to discuss a little bit more of When Angels Weep, and then we're going to move on to some other of her poems.
You're watching Exist TV, broadcasting live from downtown Windsor, from the Windsor Downtown Business Accelerator, and this is Betty on the Go with Betty Gudel. We'll be right back.
Don't let your business challenges intimidate you. In the Accelerator, you are not alone. With its state-of-the-art concept and location, you get the best environment to start your business. You have access to open desk or private offices for you to start your new business. Also, you have access to lounge, kitchen area, reception, meeting rooms to receive your clients, and support from entrepreneurs in residence and other entrepreneurs at the Downtown Windsor Business Accelerator. By entrepreneurs, for entrepreneurs. this is the place for your new business. Come and visit and see for yourself.
You are watching Exist TV, streaming live from downtown Windsor, from the Windsor Downtown Accelerator, and this is Betty on the Go with Betty Gudel. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Betty on the Go. I'm Betty Gudel, your host, and we're talking here with poet Mary Ann Mulhern. We're talking about her book, When Angels Weep. And Mary Ann is going to read one of her poems.
I think the poem that Hannah Gartner from CBC, Fifth Estate, did interview me, and she had already done a documentary on this case, and she said that she read the book, and for her the poem that stood out was 9-Year-Old Girls.
Because it's 9-year.
Yes, and so I'm going to read that poem. 9-Year-Old Girls. To the prosecutor, the priest blamed 9-year-old girls. After all, it was the short skirts they wore to school, how they sat on chairs, long dangle of legs, their mouths open to receive communion, pink tongues, soft and moist. And Betty mentioned a poem, Can't Be Right, about when he was grooming a little girl, so I'll read that poem. Can't be right. In the rectory, it's a party. Chocolate bars and pop, loud music, the Beatles, Maxwell's Silver Hammer, One Tin Soldier, Stay a While. 2 classmates fold Sunday bulletins at the oak table in the hall. Father Charlie lifts me onto his lap in his big black chair beneath a window with red velvet drapes. He says he'll be my favorite uncle, that I'm special. He points to his cheek, a kiss. Points to his lips, a kiss. Points to his tongue. I try to move away. His arms become a trap. Hands move under my blouse, beneath my skirt, inside, where it doesn't feel right, can't be right, must be right. He's father. And I think the poem that for me is one of the most poignant and haunting poems is the poem Sunday Dinner, because in this case, the family had often invited him for dinner. Mm-hmm. And there were 2 little girls in that family, and he was abusing both of them. They never told their parents, never. And here he was having dinner with them, and his parents were making very positive comments. And I just think of the horror of those little girls at Sunday dinner. So I'm going to read that poem. Father Charlie sometimes says Mass in our house, stays for dinner, takes his place next to me at the oak table. He teases about my piece of chocolate cake, asks if I want to trade. My mother smiles, says he would have made a great dad. And those parents spoke to me years and years later after the trial, and they said, what would we have done if they had told us? That's what grieves us. Would we have believed our daughters if they had told us? Because we had so much faith in that man. And so that is indeed a haunting question.
And it's, for humans, it's our never-ending quest to fit in and not to be ruled out, right?
Yes, it is.
Now, with the Catholic Church, they are changing rules because before, priests would just be moved from different parishes to different parishes, and like you were saying, when a priest had come into your parish, you didn't know why he had moved from a different parish.
Right.
It was just because he could have been in turmoil with beliefs and questioning things, and he just needed a different place to be.
Yeah, a new
right?
start. Sure. Or it was time for him to move. You know, so. Or the other priest had gone maybe for study to Rome or something like that, and so no one ever knew why he kept being moved.
No, so it was never indicated. So of course everybody felt trusting.
Right, and he was a good parish administrator. He was a good business person, and so people loved him. He had a great personality, and so they loved him. And that's one of the reasons also people could not believe that Father Sylvestre could do any of these things.
Well, and that's why I can't say that he's a psychopath, because I don't know that. But that's what a psychopath, in essence, does, is they're lovable, they're wonderful, they're smart, they're intelligent.
And people believe them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they seem very credible.
They seem very credible.
You know why?
Yes.
Is because I think at the end that he would need to be forgiven, because I don't really think that he thought what he did was really wrong, because psychopaths a lot of times do believe what they're doing is right. That's what compels them.
Okay.
In a way.
In a way, yes. He really thought that the girls were to blame. He believed that, and maybe that helped him to get through it. I don't know. We'll never know.
That's right. But it has changed. So it's not being shunned under the carpet.
Well, there's certainly there's a awareness of it, because more victims have come forward.
Yes.
And the church definitely, in years gone by, really tried to silence it. Tried very hard to silence it. Sent out letters that some people were actually excommunicated, especially in Ireland. If you said something, you were excommunicated. And
That's so horrific.
It was horrific. But however, more people have come forward. It has gone to trial. It has gone to the courts. And therefore now the church must deal with it. And I think that there is an effort.
Yes. We're going to be right back with Mary Ann Mulhern.
You are watching Exist TV, a live stream from downtown Windsor, from the Windsor Downtown Business Accelerator, and this is Betty on the Go with Betty Gudel. We'll be right back.
I'm Betty Gudel. We're speaking with Mary Ann Mulhern. We're going to be discussing her book, Sleeping with Satan. We only have about 5 minutes. I can't believe how this has went by. If you want to order any of her books, you can go to Black Moss Press. It's .com. So blackmosspress.com. Alex will have that on the screen very shortly. And this is a very interesting book, Sleeping with Satan. This is when women used to be condemned for witchcraft. And
Yes,
that's, I mean, they could have
yes.
been condemned for anything because, like you were saying, somebody wanted their property. Maybe someone didn't want to be married to someone anymore. It was a quick way of
getting rid of her.
Yeah, exactly. One poem really resonated with me, and that was the one about a little girl whose mother was condemned and killed for being a witch. And I think that for a little girl, it's got to be not only sadly losing your mother, but thinking that your mother is a horribly evil criminal.
Yes, yes. And just to give you a little background, in Salem, Massachusetts at the time, the Puritans were people who did not believe in any type of joy or celebration. It was very dour. And there was no color, there was no celebration, there were no sports, there was no art, there was no theater. And so, and they came from the Calvinist religion, where in Europe, women had been accused of witchcraft and burned at the stake. Now, the law in the U.S. was that if a woman accused as a witch would be hanged, and so these women were. But in this poem, a little girl mourns her mother, who is accused and hanged. When my mother dies, I kneel in my mother's room. One candle lights her table, a brush, a few small combs, ties for her lovely hair. In this hour my mother dies. The torment of her innocence fills my mouth, throat, and lungs, as if my body still breathes in hers. She begged me not to come to Gallows Hill, but from a distance I hear the shouts, feel the panic, her pounding heart struggling to stay with me, to save me from the eyes of her corpse. When I hold a lantern, search for my mother around courthouse and jail, disgraced Puritan church, all the graveyards of this town. There were many, many, many sad stories in this when I did the research. And there was one persona that stood out for me, and that was Bridget Bishop.
Okay.
Bridget Bishop was a young woman. She was a widow. She and her husband had successfully run 2 taverns outside of Salem, and she continued to run those and operate them. But she had a very jealous brother-in-law who wanted that property, and she was accused. Also, the women in Salem didn't like her because she wore bright clothing, bright color. She had money. They didn't. She had money, and she actually imported fabric from Paris. She was the first person accused, and she was the first person hanged.
It was anything of the unknown that was different.
Yes, and anyone who's different, and to this day we don't accept differences in
Right.
people. She must have realized, standing in that courtroom, that it was her clothing that was condemning her. And so I call the poem about Bridget Bishop Inside Out. I wear hats with golden plumes, my bodice scarlet, roses threaded round and high, sultry underskirts edged with lace. In a Salem court, my clothes turn me inside out, a witch hidden in silky seams sewn by the devil's hand. On Gallows Hill, my eyes feed a midnight owl, my dress lines nests of crows, torn lace trailing down. I just feel that it is just so tragic, not just for her, but for the other 18 women who were also hanged during this 6-month period. The Puritans were incredibly superstitious, and they knew nothing about agricultural science, and they thought that a blight was the work of a witch. And that year there was an apple blight. Yeah, just to top it all off. So maybe I'll just read that one poem, Blight. Overnight, every apple turns brown, splits open, spills useless seeds on the ground. My footprints are there, fresh from yesterday, when I walked beneath 100 trees, reached for ripened fruit, my hand a curse. I've become a witch, spoiled apple saved for the gibbet, all that flesh left to swell, wrinkled and bruised, easy to peel.
I know we're running out of time, and I just wanted to show this book. And this is Brides in Black.
Yes.
And this
Yes.
illustrates the naivety, can I say that?
Yes.
And
Innocence, I guess.
in a sense, and how nuns who did leave the convent were not prepared for the world when they're thrown into it.
Right.
And
At all.
at all, everything from money to
Dating.
to
Just the most ordinary interactions, wearing makeup, coordinating clothing. But one of the biggest issue, I think, was financial. I think that was the biggest issue, not handling money, not knowing how important it is, and not knowing how to do that. But relationships, too.
just being detached from the rest of the world,
Yes,
really, right?
Yes. And so they were naive with men. And when men would feed them lines, oh, honey, you're just gorgeous. Honey, you're beautiful.
Everything, and they believe everything because you're
Believed
taught to
it.
believe everything,
Yes.
right? And to look for the goodness in people,
Right.
And which we really should still look for the goodness in
Well,
people.
we certainly should.
Yeah.
No, we certainly should.
Now, so if you want to get any of Mary Ann Mulhern's books, you can go on to www.blackmosspress.com. And I just want to say one more thing. So Marty Gervais, he has been the first poet laureate
Yes.
in Windsor, 2012,
Yes.
for 2 years. It's 2014. That means there's going to be another Windsor poet laureate coming up. Who could that be?
Well, there's a lot of people that would qualify. There's a lot of people who will qualify, I'm sure. Will I apply? I will apply. But I think that there are some really excellent contenders.
And how does that work? Who nominates the
Well, actually, people, there's a big long form that
Okay.
you have to fill in to apply as poet laureate, and then I think City Council decides.
Well, I would love to see you being the next poet laureate.
Well, thank you,
Mary Ann.
Betty.
I think
love
you're
it
terrific.
too.
I really enjoyed reading
Thank
all the
you.
poems, and they've been really resonating with me. Have a great week. We're talking with Mary Ann Mulhern. I'm Betty Gudel. Until next week.